Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone is having a fabulous weekend. So it is Sunday afternoon, and that means it is time for our book club to continue. So today we are going to continue reading Pride and Prejudice. So this is Jane Austen's most famous novel, and it was actually among the first to establish the format of a perceptive heroine. So this would be Elizabeth Bennet and the aloof hunk, Mr. Darcy, that she comes to adore, despite the surrounding pettiness of a middle-class life. And it is actually one of the most admired novels of all times. So we are going to continue reading it. So this is chapter 1. This is a society ball at Longbourn. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However, little known about the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood. This truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered the rightful property of someone or their daughters. Thus all Longbourn was agape with excitement when it became known that Netherfield Park, the great place of the neighborhood, was to let a rich and handsome young bachelor called Bingley. And now that Bingley and his party were to attend the forthcoming ball at the Assembly Rooms. Nowhere did the news create more interest and rouse greater hopes than in the household of the Bennets, who were the chief inhabitants of Longbourn. Mr. Bennet, who was so odd a mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humor, reserve, and caprice, that the experience of 30 and 20 years had been insufficient to make his wife understand his character, was the father of 5 unmarried daughters: Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. Mrs. Bennet, a still handsome woman, of mean understanding, little information, and uncertain temper, made the business of her life getting her daughters married, and its solace visiting and news. The evening fixed for the ball came round at last, and when the Netherfield party entered the Assembly Rooms, it was found to consist of 5 persons altogether: Mr. Bingley, his 2 sisters, the husband of the elder, and another young man. Mr. Bingley was good-looking and gentlemanlike. He had a pleasant countenance and easy, unaffected manners. His sisters were fine women, with an air of decided fashion. His brother-in-law, Mr. Hurst, merely looked the gentleman, but his friend, Mr. Darcy, soon drew the attention of the room by his fine, tall person, handsome features, noble mien, and the report, which was in general circulation within 5 minutes of his entrance, of his having $10,000 a year. He was looked at with great admiration for about half the evening, till his manners gave a disgust which turned the tide of his popularity, for he was found to be proud to act above his company and above being pleased. Mr. Bingley had soon made himself acquainted with all the principal people in the room. He was lively and unreserved, danced every dance, was angry that the ball closed so early, and talked of giving one himself at Netherfield. What a contrast between him and his friend! Mr. Darcy danced with only one with Mrs. Hurst, and once with Miss Bingley, and declined being introduced to any other lady. It so happened that Elizabeth, the second eldest of the Bennet girls, had been obliged, by the scarcity of gentlemen, to sit down for 2 dances, and during part of that time Mr. Darcy had been standing near enough for her to overhear a conversation between him and Mr. Bingley, who came from the dance for a few minutes. "Come, Darcy," said he, "I must have you dance. I hate to see you standing about yourself in this stupid manner. You had better much dance." "I certainly shall not." "You know how I detest it, unless I am particularly acquainted with my partner. At such an assembly as this, that would be unsupportable. Your sisters are engaged, and there is not another woman in the room whom it would be not a punishment for me to stand up and dance with." "I would not be so fastidious as you are," cried Bingley, "for a kingdom. Upon my honor, I never met with so many pleasant girls in my life as I have this evening. And there are several of them, you see, uncommonly pretty." "You are dancing with the only handsome girl in the room," said Mr. Darcy, looking at the eldest, Miss Bennet. "Oh, she is the most beautiful creature I have ever beheld. But there is one of her sisters sitting down just behind you who is also very pretty, and I dare say very agreeable. Do let me ask my partner to introduce you." "Which do you mean?" And turning round, he looked for a moment at Elizabeth, till, catching her eye, he withdrew his own, and coldly said, "She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me, and I am in no humor at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men. You had better return to your partner and enjoy her smiles, for you are wasting your time with me." Mr. Bingley followed his advice. Mr. Darcy walked off, and Elizabeth remained with no very cordial feelings towards him. She told the story, however, with great spirit among her friends, for she had a lively, playful disposition which delighted in anything ridiculous. All right, we are going to continue with Chapter 2, which is called The Bennet Girls and Their Lovers. Despite its rather uncompromising commencement, the course of a few days placed in the acquaintance of the Bennets with the Bingleys on a footing approaching friendship. And soon matters began to stand somewhat as follow. It was obvious that Charles Bingley and Jane Bennet were mutually attracted, and this despite the latter's outward composure, which, like her amiability of manner and the charity of view, was apt to mislead the superficial observer. On the other hand, while the Bingley ladies expressed themselves as willing to know the two elder Miss Bennets, and pronounced Jane a sweet girl, they found the other females of the family impossible. Mrs. Bennet was intolerably stupid and tedious. Mary, who, being the only plain member of her family, piqued herself on the extent of her reading and the solidity of her reflections, was a moralist, while Lydia and Kitty were loud, silly, giggling girls who spent all their time running after men. As for Mr. Darcy, the indifference he at first felt to Elizabeth Bennet was gradually converted into a sort of guarded interest. Originally, he had scarcely allowed her to be pretty, but now he admired the beautiful expression of her dark eyes. To this discovery succeeded some others equally mortifying. Though he had detected more than one failure of perfect symmetry in her form, he was forced to acknowledge her figure to be light and pleasing, and in spite of his asserting that her manners were not those of the fashionable world, he was caught by their easy playfulness. He began to wish to know more of her, and as a step towards conversing with her himself, he attended to her conversation with others, while, since he both and she were of a satirical turn, they soon began to exchange little rallying, challenging speeches, so that Caroline Bingley, who was openly angling for Darcy herself, said to him one night, "How long has Miss Elizabeth Bennet been such a favorite? And pray, when am I to wish you joy?" To which remarks he merely replied, "That is exactly the question which I expected you to ask." A lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love to matrimony in a moment. I knew you would be wishing me joy. Meantime, the friendship subsisting between the two families was advanced by a business of some days paid by the two Bennet sisters to the Bingleys, at whose house Jane, thanks to her mother's scheming, was laid up with a bad cold. On this occasion, Jane was coddled and made much of by her dear friends Caroline and Mrs. Hurst. But Elizabeth was now reckoned too attractive by one sister and condemned as too sharp-tongued by both. "Elizabeth Bennet," said Miss Bingley when the door was closed on her, "is one of the young ladies who seek to recommend themselves to the other sex by undervaluing their own. And with many men, I dare say it succeeds. But in my opinion, it is a very mean art." "Undoubtedly," replied Darcy, to whom this remark was chiefly addressed. "There is meanness in all the arts, which ladies sometimes condescend to employ for captivation. Whatever bears affinity, cunning is despicable." Now, Mrs. Bingley was not so entirely satisfied with this reply as to continue the subject. Nevertheless, Darcy's growing attachment to Elizabeth Bennet was little dreamt of by that young lady. Indeed, her prejudice against him was strengthened by her pleasant intercourse with a handsome and agreeable young man named Wickham, an officer of the militia regiment quartered at the house near Longbourn. He told her how he was the son of a trusted steward of Darcy's father, and had been left by the old gentleman to his heir's liberality and care, and how Darcy had absolutely disregarded his father's wishes, and had treated his protege in cruel and unfeeling fashion. On the top of this discourse, and it just seemed certain that the Bingley was on point of proposing to Jane, the whole Netherfield party suddenly abandoned Hertfordshire and returned to town, partly, as Elizabeth could not help thinking, in consequence of the behavior of her family at a ball given at Netherfield Park, where it appeared to it that they had made an agreement to expose themselves as much as they could during the evening. They could not have played their parts with more spirit or finer success. And now we are going to read chapter 3. Elizabeth rejects the rector. "I hope, my dear," said Mr. Bennet to his wife, "that you have ordered a good dinner today, because I have reason to expect an addition to our family party. My cousin, Mr. Collins, who, when I am dead, may turn you all out of this house as soon as he pleases." "Oh, my dear," cried his wife, "pray do not talk of that odious man." Mrs. Bennet continued to rail bitterly against the cruelty of settling an estate away from a family of 5 daughters, in favor of a man whom nobody cared anything about. Thus the Reverend Mr. Collins of Hunsford, the heir presumptive to Longbourn, came to visit the Bennets. He was a tall and heavy-looking man of 25. His air was grave and stately, and his manners were very formal. He was a strange mixture of pomposity, servility, self-importance, a creature of most abjectly and most amusingly devoid of anything like tact, taste, or humor. Being ready to make the Bennet girls every possible amends for their unwilling injury he must eventually do to them, he thought first of all of offering himself to Jane. But hearing that her affections were pre-engaged, he had only to change from Jane to Elizabeth. It was soon done while Mrs. Bennet was stirring the fire. He proposed he made it to the younger lady in a long set speech, in which he explained, first of all, his general reasons for marrying, and then his reasons for directing his matrimonial views to Longbourn, finally assuring her that on the subject of the small portion she would bring him no reproach and ever shall pass his lips when they were to be married. It was absolutely necessary to interrupt him then, so Elizabeth told him that he was too hasty, thanked him for his proposals, and then declined them. "I am not now to learn," replied Mr. Collins, with a formal wave of the hand, "that it is usual with young ladies to reject the encounters of the men whom they secretly mean to accept, when he first applies for their favor, and that sometimes the refusal is repeated a second or even a third time. I am therefore by no means discouraged by what you have said, and shall hope to lead you to the altar not after too long." "Upon my word, sir," cried Elizabeth, "your hope is rather an extraordinary one after my declaration. I do assure you that I am not one of those young ladies who are so daring as to risk their happiness on the chance of being asked a second time. I am perfectly serious in my refusal. You could never make me happy. And I am convinced that I am the last woman in the world who would make you happy. Nay, were your patron, Lady Catherine, to know me, I am persuaded that she would find me in every respect ill qualified for this situation," said Mr. Collins very gravely. "I cannot imagine that her ladyship would at all disapprove of you, and you may be certain that when I have the honor of seeing her again, I shall speak in the highest terms of your modesty, economy, and other amiable qualifications." Twice more was Mr. Collins refused, and even then he would not take no for an answer. "You must give me leave to flatter myself, my dear cousin," said he, "that your refusals of my addresses were merely words of course. My reasons for believing it are chiefly these. It does not appear to me that my hand is unworthy of your acceptance, or that the establishment I can offer would be any than highly desirable. My situation in life, my connections with the family of de Bourgh, and my relationship to your own, are circumstances highly in my favor. And you should take it into further consideration that, in spite of your manifold attractions, it is by no means certain that another offer of marriage will ever be made to you. Your portion is unhappily so small that it will, in all likelihood, undo the effects of your loveliness and amiable qualifications. As I must, therefore, conclude that you are not serious in your rejection of me, I shall choose to attribute it to your wish of increasing my love by suspense, according to the usual practice of elegant females." "I do assure you, sir," said Elizabeth, "that I have no pretensions whatever to that kind of elegance which consists of tormenting a respectable man. I would rather be paid the compliment of being believed sincere. I thank you again and again and again for the honor you have done me in your proposals, but to accept them is absolutely impossible. My feelings in every respect forbid it. Can I speak plainer? Do you not consider me now as an elegant female intending to plague you, but as a rational creature speaking the truth from her heart? You are uniformly charming, said he, with an air of awkward gallantry, and I am persuaded that, when sanctioned by the express authority of both your excellent parents, my proposals will be acceptable. So that's where we will end it today. So as we've read, Elizabeth is kind of caught in a love triangle. She definitely wants Mr. Darcy, and there is attraction between her and Mr. Darcy. But then this awful cousin, Reverend Collins, who is presumably about 3 times as old as she is, will not take no for an answer and will not accept that she doesn't want to be with him at all. And so clearly you can see this is a wonderful romance novel, and it's really perfect in timing with February, the month of love and Valentine's Day. So I hope you guys are enjoying this book, Pride and Prejudice. Again, it's written by Jane Austen, and we will conclude it next week. So next week will be our final reading of Pride and Prejudice. Of course, if you do want to read the longer book, I do have it. So please ask me if you're interested in that, and I can loan it out to you. And until next week, I will see you very soon.